Absolute Superman, the last of the Absolute Trinity, has arrived. So let's take a look at the Absolute version of Kal-El. The Absolute Universe is an initiative that's ongoing time recording at DC Comics. It's a new offshoot universe that's split off from the main timeline. So currently, it's its own universe doing its own thing. Different versions of the characters. They're meant to have come from a universe that was created by Darkseid energy. At some point, most likely, they will cross over, but that time is not now. And may it not be for a little bit. Let the universe cook. Absolute Superman of the big three had the least amount of buildup overall, and was also released last. However, as some say, last but not least. There are a lot of interesting things happening in Absolute Superman, as well as some retreads. The main question many had was, does Superman stay on base? Or is this just another evil Superman outing? If that was the concern, breathe easy, for it is not. Or at least doesn't seem to be as of issue 1. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and let's take a look at Absolute Superman #1. And since we're close to time of release, spoilers. Absolute Superman #1 is by Jason Aaron, with art by Rafa Sandoval and colors by Ulysses Areola. The arc is Last Dust of Krypton. This issue, part 1, Down the Dirt, which could be viewed as having a bit of a layered meaning. There are people who are literally working in the dirt, toiling, both on Earth and on Krypton, but it could also be meant to show the L's class positioning, and that does play into the story. This story is very big on theming, and it being in many ways foregrounded. This issue starts off describing Krypton. This is a Krypton that is deeply mired in a class system, almost a caste system. This is something that Krypton has been depicted as having before, both in comics and in adaptations. Pre-Crisis Krypton was oftentimes more utopian than the post. However, even the Christopher Reeve Superman film had a colder Krypton, and there were hints of hierarchy from the start, so this is not a new concept. So there have long been inklings of the idea that the world that Superman hails from was not perfect. What's unique about this rendition is the L's positioning inside of the hierarchy. Krypton is a science-first society, and because of that, their elite tier are the science class. To the point where they seem to have received near religious status, they're actually called clerics, and society is structured around them and ancient laws. Cities like Kandor and Argo are hubs for elites, which will pose or could potentially pose some interesting questions for how Superman is going to relate to Supergirl or Kara if they bring that in. In the cities work the clerics of the Science League, harnessing the energies of the red sun and the planet itself to fuel their insatiable hunger for progress at all costs. They were the Kryptonian ruling class, the most venerated minds on the planet, and my parents were not among them. The idea of scientists being paramount in society and just their lust for progress being what ends up destroying the planet, consuming it from within, is a fascinating one. They alas add the monetary aspect, which makes it a bit less unique or alien. Now they do have to actually work to do something with this change in class, because even as members of the elite tier back in the original story, Jor-El and Lara, it didn't help them. Nobody listened to Jor-El anyway. In fact, that was part of the humiliation, the fact that he was saying things that they didn't agree with, and he was kind of exiled and shunned because of it. So what does this story do to make up for the fact that either way Jor-El is ignored? What the story seeks to do is set Lara and Jor-El up as more rebels against the existing system, a trait that will rub off on Kal, who in this story spends more time with them, and it's also just a kind of undercurrent running through the entire Absolute universe, that kind of press against the status quo, whatever the status quo in each of the stories happens to be. Now, as mentioned, Kal in the story spends more time with them, so they seem to have a more direct impact on him, and seeing his parents' struggles against Kryptonian authority and how they are treated as a lower class is part of what drives him to protect the people of Earth in similar situations. So the setup is thought out, and a lot of it draws from the classic lore, down to things like the usage of clothes. The class structure on Krypton defined all aspects of life. I mean, they usually do. At its pinnacle reigned the Science League. You can see they're very concerned with driving that home, because that's a bit of repetition, because they already said that only a couple of pages before. On the bottommost rung of the ladder toiled the Labor Guild. Class distinctions were of such importance that citizens were required to wear their status at all times. The crest of the laborer was seen as a mark of shame, the sign of the poor and unskilled. People like my parents wore it with pride. Subtlety has no place in any of the class systems of Krypton. The use of clothing as important has long been part of Superman's story. 80s Supergirl used that as part of the reason why she started wearing a headband. There were often different crests visible. It's not always been something that's been overtly tied to the societal structure of Krypton, but there's been something inherently performative about the clothing, even if it hasn't always been enacted in the stories themselves. But drawing upon that and expanding upon it, it doesn't come from nowhere. Now the S symbol has once more been tweaked, since heaven forbid Superman just likes to monogram his things. This time, as the crest of the labor class which his parents belong to and a symbol of shame, him wearing it will have a bit of a reclamation element. A decent amount of the first issue is spent setting up the vibe of Krypton and his parents' histories. And there's also just some time spent there in that world with the lower classes. The story really takes the time to show how Lara and Jor-El's dreams were crushed. In school, my mother, Lara Lorvan, was an exemplary student, destined for great things, everyone said. until she wrote an essay criticizing Krypton's lack of funding for interstellar exploration. For this, she was labeled unruly and forbidden from ever applying to the Science Academy. She was 9 years old. So she was also a genius then, because that seems like pretty heavy stuff for a 9-year-old essay. She wanted to be an astronaut. Miles will vary as to whether these moments draw the reader in or if they find them heavy-handed. Little things like the phrasing in the essay that she wrote. Will it seem like something that would have been written by someone of that age? Or is one meant to believe that the children of Krypton are just different and advance faster or have different vocabularies? There is also the fact to consider that if this is a society that has functioned like this for a long time in the shadow of such systemic oppression, openly, most likely her parents would have checked that essay. People would be used to living under the idea that they could not speak their mind. It's a moment that could break the verisimilitude for some. What one is meant to take from that scene is that her dreams were taken from her at such a young age, but it's the execution that will determine whether or not that lands for people. The environmentalism message present is not only there to be inferred through the ways the technology and laborers are being used, but is outright stated. There is a bit of a sense overall throughout this issue of just really making sure that the reader doesn't take any other type of interpretation to anything going on, which some may not mind, while others may feel that it's being belabored or that they're being talked down to. At times, the turn of phrase can come across a bit oddly as a result. 3,000? That's obscene. I could build you your own cloud seeders for that. Sure, and when you get locked up for illegal sciencing, who's gonna fix my harvester? The idea of a structure so rigid that people can't leave their function for fear of reprisal is a serious one, but illegal sciencing does not convey the level of gravity of the situation. This section does do a lot to establish Krypton though, which given that it will be important to Cal is a strong choice. This is going to see his personality be derived a bit more from his time on Krypton. It remains to be seen whether or not this is going to put him more into a Supergirl territory or if it's going to stay something a bit more unique. Jor-El, like Lara, also spoke up and it cost him his future, but he still had the same training, so he could still tell that Krypton is dying. And once more, people don't listen to him. Whatever the universe, nobody's listening to Jor-El. When it comes to the art for the Kryptonian section, it's very strong in how the planet is depicted. It has an overall red hue because of the sun, and it does come across like an alien world. The redness of the city almost makes parts of it look like Apocalypse. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but if it was, it would be a very strong parallel to the idea that Darkseid's influence has just spread everywhere, because not only does Apocalypse kind of look like that, it's mined out through and through, but it's just also that redness. There's a strong moment in the mines where the way everything's breaking apart makes it look like the planet is bleeding in a neat bit of visual storytelling, and the blood in quotes oozing out, it's green, seemingly kryptonite. A guy melts. It's very intense. The whole issue could have taken place on Krypton. There's just so much care placed there, even if there were moments that were heavy-handed. The story cuts from that moment on Krypton years ago to Earth, Brazil, where miners are being exploited by Lazarus Corp. Much of what occurs in this section is meant to mirror the opening on Krypton, and Cal narrates it in much the same manner. This makes Cal the only one out of the three, it's just a note, to be the one narrating his story from the first issue. That's neither here nor there, I just find it interesting. There is a bit of a disconnect in how Cal narrates the things that are happening. It's very much statements of fact. Perhaps that's meant to play into the idea that as of the first issue, he seems a bit like a wanderer. There are tales that are floating around of a man who's going from place to place, helping the disenfranchised, specifically focusing on workers. In this case, he clears a mine of asbestos and crushes the coal into diamonds, which raises questions among the peacemakers who are there to control the workers and make sure that everything gets done. The use of peacemakers is interesting not only from the synergistic kind of viewpoint, but also because there's a history of how Peacemaker and how that character evolved through DC Comics. He was originally a Charlton character. Not right now, we'll go into it another time. Cal's interference actually gets the workers into trouble, and despite the fact that he needs to recharge, he goes to help them. There are some hints that are laid out as to Cal's powers being different, in terms of his control over them and how he's able to access them. He does still seem to be powered from the sun, because as mentioned that he needs to get some solar power. But when you see through his eyes a few times, it's X-ray vision, and his eye beams are more of a blast. His suit is also talking to him, and he's talking to it. It's the suit. If you look closely, you can see it's shifting, changing shape, like living armor, protecting him. And sometimes I'd swear he's talking to it. Ooh, so that'll be interesting to see if the suit was the ship. Kal-El, no! I can't. I can't say that without thinking about that moment from Justice League.
Kal-El, no!
Anyway. Kal-El, no. You know you cannot control your... The agent that we saw, by the way, is Lois. This is the heir of short-haired Lois. She's an agent for Lazarus Command, so her military roots seem more present than the journalistic ones so far. Because in many canons, Lois's father has ties to the military. General Lane. Do not engage. Do not risk your life for these people. Leave this place. Return to the shadows, please. You must never forget the lesson of Krypton. Some worlds simply cannot be saved. With that, the quest for this Superman is set, at least in terms of how he will seek hope. It seems that he'll be pushing against that idea. We'll see if he still ends up being the ultimate embodiment of it, as in the classic story there's a strong element of that in how his parents just send him off to a new world hoping his life will be better, so from infancy he is the product of hope. In issue 1, it appears the hope may come more from seeking something greater despite the odds, more of the idea of the light in the darkness. And I've seen a lot of places like this, industries that run on suffering. How do you know which is the truth? You know when you have what is worth fighting for. That is the truth. I think he was trying to ask a question about more like universal truth. We'll see how this plays out. This issue does not work out the best for Kal, or Superman as Lois Snidely calls him. So he's being set up because of his lack of control over his powers as being a bit more vulnerable. The issue then has 3 codas. A return to Krypton for the reveal that Kal is older than one is used to seeing him. A flash to a destroyed Kent farm. And the coolest one to me, though miles may vary, which is the shot of what seems to be Brainiac with all the bottle cities with the people begging for help. A scrumptious new toy. Wonder where you came from. We'll see. Maybe it's Lex. Maybe it's Lex and Brainiac combined. They love to do that. And that's Absolute Superman #1. This story is incredibly deliberate in the sense that all the choices it makes are clearly in service of the core theming. You could kind of see it as you're looking at it from a structural standpoint. So in that sense, it's very strong. And the art bolsters it. Each section is playing with the use of color and very deliberate in its environments. It lays out and establishes key locales to Kal, prioritizing Krypton for the moment to showcase how it shapes him while paralleling its systems to the structures of Earth. It also sets up this building sense of urgency, a bit more so on Krypton, but then it really picks up on Earth once the Peacemakers show up. In the moments where it's more subtle, it really shines, such as the ways Kal's powers and the differences are being laid out, or even how his name is given. There seems to be meant to be a bit of a mystery surrounding him and his placement on Earth, and part of that is playing on what people are used to seeing from him before. The issue leans into things, like his powers being different while acknowledging that many are likely familiar with them. It's playing that prior knowledge to its advantage. However, it's not always subtle, and its messaging at times can be like a sledgehammer to the face. Kal-El, this is a planet of combustion engines, fanatical religions, and thermonuclear weapons. These people are never safe. I don't know what voice to give the suit, so it's gonna be dealer's choice. Now, while these moments and what they're talking about are part of the story because it's largely focused on fighting oppression, miles will vary on whether the reader feels preached at or not. Of the 3 books so far as of issue 1, this one feels the most like it's been impacted by being created by Darkseid energy in terms of how both Krypton and the Earth have changed. And Superman is there, and the way he's positioned, you can kind of get the sense of Darkseid laying him low, trying to put him in a different position, maybe if you're looking at it like that. But if you haven't read the DC All-In Special, one may not look at it like that. Everybody's coming at it from different subject positioning, so let me know what you think. I'm very curious to hear what you think, always. Absolute Superman, while at points it uses its prior knowledge well, like the powers, other times it leans into it perhaps a bit too much, if the goal of the story is that could also appeal to entirely new readers. Since some of the reveals rely heavily on past knowledge, like the Kent farm, or Brainiac sitting there with his cities. Those are moments that inside the story don't have the most context, but one needs to bring that in from outside and then apply it. But if one is familiar, it does build the intrigue. So for those that have some kind of prior knowledge, which in all fairness, given Superman's status as a cultural icon is likely, there are kernels of what's going to happen and it could be exciting. And some of the conceptual changes, depending upon how they play out and if they really lean into them, they could be very interesting, like the equivocation of religion and science. That could be really fascinating. All of this, of course, depends if one is engaged with the work. There is also the potential one can find themselves disconnected from the proceedings. As mentioned, Kal has this matter-of-fact way of laying things out, which if one doesn't connect with the stated emotional underpinning of certain facts may fall flat. Some may find this type of wandering Kal too close to the New 52, or some may feel it's not doing enough new things in general. And some may still find him boring. There are those who find Superman boring. I'm not among them, but it is a sentiment that is out there. On creating this world, Jason Aaron stated, "I've gone in and changed a lot about Krypton, about his parents, about his life there, about how he came to Earth, about what happened once he got to Earth, his relationship to Smallville and the Kents, and where he is when we first meet him, and everyone else from his supporting cast, both allies and villains, their relationship to Superman and where they are when we meet him. All that stuff is different, changed, tweaked, but in ways that all come together to tell one cohesive story and really to drive home again the most important thing, which is what this character stands for, why he fights, and what motivates him, what makes him special." Did this issue make Superman feel special to you? Are you into Absolute Superman so far? Did it leave you cold? Are you meh? Did you feel it was off base? Which of the Absolute books so far is your fave? None is also an option. Please just leave all your thoughts down below. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time today spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.